welcome, welcome. We're so glad that you're here with us today. You are at Trauma Informed Teaching, sponsored by Wisconsin Literacy. Wisconsin Literacy is a nonprofit statewide coalition of 70 literacy agencies. We strengthen literacy through professional development opportunities, personalized consultation, health literacy, workforce connections, networking, and advocacy. I am so pleased to introduce Janita Bonner. Janita is the Executive Administrator of the YWCA of Southeastern Wisconsin. She holds a bachelor's degree in social work from Marian College and has worked in social services for 16 years and in adult ed for 6 years. Janita's passion is to bring individuals who have been systematically wounded and change their perspective on what life and success looks like. Janita, it's all yours.
All right. Thank you, Marcia. Good afternoon, everyone. Like Marcia said, my name is Janita Bonner, and I'll be giving you some tips on today on trauma-informed care and how to shift your perspective on trauma. So while everybody is joining us today, if you can go ahead and put in the chat box what organization you are from, or careers that you are in, or whatever the case may be, because that'll help kind of respond to different things as I'm going along. I can see the chat box. I'm gonna ask that all questions be held to the very end. I'll have a Q&A section, but I'm gonna be interacting with you all today. So this won't be just your snooze kind of situation where you are just listening. I'm gonna ask that you all participate in the chat box. So let's go ahead and get started. And welcome. Oh, that's just another slide. So before I go ahead and get started, I want to let you know that when I talk about trauma-informed care, I want it to always be a safe zone. When we talk about trauma, a lot of people feel like they want to shy away from the subject, that they don't want to discuss it. But I'm here to tell you that today is going to be a safe zone, a safe place to talk about it, and a safe place for us to learn some different skills on how to deal with trauma. Now let's talk about what is trauma. It's a deeply distressing or disturbing experience, emotional shock following a stressful event or a physical injury, which may be associated with physical shock and sometimes leads to long-term mental illness. So that is a wide range definition. So it's not just one thing that may cause trauma, it's a variety of things that may cause trauma in your life. Now, my question for you all as you are in the chat box is, where do we often see trauma? Go ahead and type in the chat box where you may often see trauma. And there's no right or wrong answer, but where are some places that you have seen trauma? You've heard about trauma. Where do you see trauma? We got schools, acts of violence, post-disasters, homes, so many places. That is correct. You see trauma everywhere, in our students, in our homes. So that's pretty much the list that I have as well, is where do you see trauma? In work, school, malls, churches, in our families, and in our homes. The reason why I like to point this out is because sometimes people like to put trauma in a category where it's like, oh, it's that particular group and that won't affect me. But the reality is that each one of us have a situation where we face trauma, and sometimes we're dealing with trauma on a regular basis. Rather if we are an instructor, rather if we are a boss, a manager, if we're in a company, an owner of a company, we're gonna engage in or witness some trauma in our lives. So one thing that I want to make clear is that oftentimes when we talk about trauma or talk about something that's negative, a person may say, hey, I'm the person I'm the trauma, I'm this, I'm that. But the reality is that person is not the situation. It's just something that they've been through. And it's so important for us to have those conversations to say that you are not your trauma. It's something that you've gone through, and I'm willing to help you get through those different things. So on this page here, I have, what does trauma look like? And so we mentioned that it's in different places, but when we say trauma, I've listed off a few things. But if there's something not listed here, go ahead and put it in the chat box, because there's a ton of different things that trauma can look like. And that's through domestic violence, loss of a loved one, an accident, rather if it's serious or it can be just a tumble down the stairs, an absent parent, change in the household, loss of employment, gain of employment. Different things can cause a person to have trauma. And so we think about who does trauma really impact? Because again, I believe that sometimes people really think that, hey, it could never happen to me. I would never be in that situation. But the reality is that we're all in a space where we can really, really be impacted by trauma, whether if it's directly or indirectly. So we have here our students, and that's students of any age. So we're saying from K4 all the way up until adulthood. Families, and not just specific families or ethnic groups, but all ethnicities. Classrooms, instructors, staff, social economic groups, and anywhere in your community can be impacted by trauma. And when we talk about trauma, it's so important to mention the ACEs, which if you've never heard of it, it's called Adverse Childhood Experiences. And this is something that a lot of people don't talk about, but I know from working and teaching with different groups that this is so important to take a look at. And the ACEs is traumatic experiences that children experience before the age of 18 years old. So if this is your second time being with me, thank you for coming. But if this is your first time, I'm going to just briefly go over some things that may put a person in this category, because in the previous presentation, I kind of went over specific questions and I gave everybody an opportunity to answer, but I'm kind of just going to have you listen to the questions and just to see like how many people as you listen, like say, hey, I fall into that category. Where you stay in a household where a parent has insulted you, put you down, or humiliated you. Where you have been in a household where you've been punched, slapped, grabbed, or somebody threw something at you, or hit you so hard and it left a mark on you or caused an injury to your body. When an adult or a person at least 5 years old or older has touched or fondled you in a sexual way. Did you often or very often feel that no one in your family loved you or thought you were important or special? You feel like, your family didn't look out for each other and you didn't feel close or supported. How often do you feel that, were you in a household where you didn't have enough to eat, you had dirty clothes, or you felt like someone was not there to protect you? You had a parent that often got drunk or high and couldn't take you to the doctor or take care of you. You had a biological parent that was lost through divorce, abandonment, or some other reason. You had a mother or stepmother that was often pushed, grabbed, slapped, or had something thrown at her, or even kicked or bitten or hit. You were in a household where someone had experienced depression or mental illness, or even attempted suicide. You had a person in your family that went to prison. These are just a few things to mention, but when we think about all these different things, how many of us said, hey, that happened to me? At least one of them. Most of the time when we have sessions like this, there's at least one person that says, yeah, I've been through that situation. Well, you had an adverse childhood experience. And according to the CDC, that when you go through those things under the age of 18, it affects every part of your body and your development. It can affect your mental health, your maternal health. You're more susceptible to HIV and STDs, chronic diseases, risky behaviors, and it minimizes your opportunities for education. And one may say, well, how does that even happen? It's because of the different things that have not been dealt with in your life at that early age. Think about it. As a child, if you have someone being abused in the household, how do you as an adult step up and deal with something like that? And most of the time, therapy and talking about those situations are forbidden in households. How many of us have been told to stay in a child's place when there was something important to talk about? Nobody gave you the opportunity to speak up about what was going on and how to handle things. So when we have people that are dealing with these situations as a child and they're never dealt with, then we come into situations that they end up being an adult in our environment. Rather if that is our employees, rather if that is the students that we're teaching in the classroom, They've been affected by these things and they have not been discussed, handled, or treated. And so the goal today is to really educate you all on how to deal with people that may be facing these things, or to even how to deal with yourself and how to just protect your peace and moving forward in life. So I'm going to share a couple of pictures with you all. And I just want you to use the chat box to communicate and just let me know when you see these pictures, what do you feel? So this picture right here is just, well, it has several pictures in here, excuse me. So we have a picture of some kids lining up. We have a school lunch. We have the parachute game. We have a trapper keeper. And then we have Lisa Frank on here. So when you see some of these pictures, what does it make you think when you first look at them? Does it make you excited? How does it make you feel? Just go ahead and put it in the chat box for me. We got being, hold on, nostalgic, memories, love the trapper keeper, being young, feel like a kid again, lunch made me sad and sick, structure, complicated mix of things of nostalgia and some anxiety. Lisa Frank makes me excited. Oh yeah, those Lisa Frank notebooks, pens, and jelly pens are the thing to go to back in the day. So for a lot, and thank you all for, we're gonna have another one as well, but thank you all for your comments in this. Most of you had a lot of positive feedback when you see this as like, hey, this was a good time, it was fun. But then I did have somebody mention that the food lunch made them sad and sick. So sometimes when we think about things that may be happy for us can be definitely sad for somebody else. When I seen this picture, I said, well, the various pictures that I put together, I said, these can be looked at from different perspectives depending on who you are and how life went for you. So when we look at this, I want to start off with the picture on the left-hand side with the students lined up. And so we think about when kids are in like K4, K5, somebody mentioned structure. It's putting a structure there like, hey, when you get in line, make sure that you have your hands by your side, your head is up, don't touch anybody, don't poke at anybody, give each other some personal space. The one in the middle talks, I'm gonna go down to the trapper keeper. The trapper keeper was one of those things that's like, oh, that was the thing to have. It was the most organized thing to have when you were in school. And it has all these different compartments and it was something cool to have. Lisa Frank, it put a lot of smiles on our faces, and it also put smiles on our faces today in regards to the prettiest, coolest things that could be offered for school supplies. We look at the picture in the middle, and it's the parachute where the young lady is sitting in the middle. I don't know how many of you remember this, but this is, and it's not for everybody's gym class, but it was something where they called out your color and you ran underneath and they caught you. And it was just a fun thing to have at gym whenever you were able to do this. And then we have the picture in the right-hand corner, the upper right-hand corner, which is lunch. And so these things mean different things for different people, but how many of you acknowledge that any of these pictures could be traumatic for some people? You can write in the chat box. And let me get into that, what that really means, because you're like, hey, this is a bunch of kids lining up. It's some cool material for school. It's a game during gym. They're having lunch. What could possibly be going on in this picture? When we think about schooling and how things were done, it can cause a lot of trauma for a lot of people. And I say that because when you're a child, you are taught to, we said that this is called structure. So for a child, if you're not able to follow the directions, not because you don't want to, but because, hey, you want to talk to your friend and whisper in their ear, or you want to do something that is a little bit different, you feel like, hey, if I don't do this, then I'm not going to, the teacher's not going to like me. I'm not going to be in a good space. We go down to the Lisa Frank and the Trapper Keeper material. We all said they were cool, but realistically, Lisa Frank and Trapper Keepers were very expensive. We think about the picture in the middle and we look at the parachute game, and sometimes gym can be very, very stressful. The reason for that is because a child may or may not have the right shoes to participate in gym. Or you may not be the person that's called for the dodgeball game, or called, your color may not be called out. You may be the last one that's picked. And for the picture on the right-hand side at the top with the lunch, lunch can be stressful for a lot of people when they're children, because sometimes this is the only meal that you may have. And you say, well, how would this relate to an adult? Well, think about it like this. If you were in a place where you're saying, hey, this is the only meal that I have, and as an adult, it comes to lunchtime, and how many people actually have money to pay for lunch? It makes you remember that time where you were in the lunch line and you had the food and that was your only meal. And now as an adult, where you feel like you should be in a better space, you don't have lunch money to just participate and interact with your coworkers. And then when you're participating in different things in the gym class, you weren't selected for those things. And if you are not pulled in for a project on your job, it makes you feel some kind of way. And the reality is that these small things trickle over into adulthood that sometimes people don't understand, that play a huge impact on how people move forward with different things. I'm going to go to the next set of pictures. Now, these pictures are a little bit different. So let me know how you feel when you see these. So we have a backpack, a chalkboard that says hello, a person that looks like they may have gotten in a little bit of trouble and has to do detention or something, or recess or something like that. We have pencils. We have a perfect attendance certificate, and then the honor roll superstar. What do you see, or how do you feel when you look at these pictures? And the reason why I chose these pictures is because when we think about as adults, a lot of times people feel like, hey, a backpack, that's something that you're going to school with. And the first thing I thought about when I seen the backpack, and if I see an adult with a backpack, I think about, wow, somebody may be carrying around a lot of baggage. We naturally assume that a person who has a backpack full of things that they need. But oftentimes there's a lot of people walking around in need of so many things, but they have that backpack wishing that they had the things that they needed, like the pencils. How many times have we been in a space where somebody needs to borrow a pencil or a pen and they did not have the tools to be successful? So think about being in the first or second grade and everybody has something to write with, but you don't. Think about being that person who all your friends or all the people around you are celebrated. I know when I was a kid, they gave us pizza parties for those people who were on the honor roll. And what if you were in a space where you did not make the honor roll and you didn't have pizza for lunch? And then we have the perfect attendance certificate. It's so interesting that nobody ever thinks about what this really means, because it says perfect attendance, meaning that you as a child will be there on time on a regular basis, meaning that you would get there safely and do what you need to do in class. When the reality is that sometimes you may be relying on a parent to get you to where you need to be perfect for school. How hard is it for a person to even understand what perfection is? At my age, I don't know what perfect is, but some people are still striving to be that perfect person so that they can be a perfect in the space of perfection to still get that perfect attendance award. There are so many things that when you're a child in a classroom setting, they say that you need to be a certain way, but sometimes that weighs heavily on people that are not able to be perfect, that are not able to get those 4.0s or 3.0s. That person that may have forgotten their school supplies, or didn't have somebody to lend them a pencil, and they find themselves being in a position where they're at the board and now they're in trouble. They're at the chalkboard and it makes them feel some kind of way. It's like, I just wanted to do right, but I wasn't perfect enough. My grades weren't right enough. And I'm not able to have all the tools that I need in my backpack, but I'm constantly carrying around baggage as a kid. Now, when we think about carrying baggage, we always say, hey, adults, we carry the baggage. We've had a hard life and all that kind of stuff. But how often do we acknowledge the baggage and the stress and the anxiety that a child carries along? So think about being in this position where you don't have what you need. You may not be what they consider to be perfect in school, but you're still striving to be that and even be that as an adult. So I want to go through some classroom and slash work triggers. I have work on here because I feel like when I talk about trauma, a lot of people don't really tap into what their triggers are for themselves, because I just went over some pretty deep things that look pretty simple on the page, but can really cause somebody to be in a traumatic situation or be in a space where they remember those times where they were not the perfect student. They didn't have everything they need, and nobody even bothered to ask what they were in need of. So when we're working in our classrooms and when we are working at work, it's so important to be to take those things into consideration, to be perfectly honest. Because for me, one thing that I learned is that a lot of people are triggered by different things, and it's important for us to learn some common triggers that a person may have that may put them back in that space of trauma. And they may not have an episode where they're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe this. They may not even show anything, but there's a few things that I've learned by being in social services that can trigger a person to be in a space where it's a little uncomfortable. And that's why I said today, when we're here together, this is a safe space. So when we're talking about these different things, and it may cause you to be triggered, it's a safe space, and it's a safe place for us to talk about this. So having unattainable expectations, like the honor roll. I think that it's cool for a person to have the honor roll, but in the same note, what if you can't make that? You can strive your best and maybe you just cannot get that 3.0 or that 4.0. Does that make you feel like you're less than? And even then, if you have that and you move it to your adult life, think about a person that says, okay, I just want to do well on the job. I want to do well in the classroom, but I've always been told that I was not perfect. I was not good enough to go ahead and to make it this far. When I did adult education, it was so hard to just encourage people and let them know that they can still do things because they were so traumatized by the different things that they were taught in life, that they were not smart enough, that they were not good enough. And we have to really, really build them up when they come to adult education, because somebody has already told them that they were going to fail. Somebody already told them that they were not going to be good. And the reality is that in their heads, it's like, I cannot do that. That's too much for me. I don't have it in my power. So now they've given up before they've even started. Micro and macro managing. So a lot of times when a person is doing micromanagement, it can make a person feel as if they are in a space of, you don't know what you're doing. I got to watch every single thing that you're doing. And that can break down a person's confidence. Now, I know each job is different, but I'm just saying these are some triggers that sometimes people don't even think about, like, wow, didn't even think that can be a trigger for trauma for somebody else. When a person is striving towards perfection or trying to be great, and you're working diligently, and you have somebody constantly over your shoulders and looking and saying, oh, did you do this? Did you do that? Are you doing things right? And it makes a person feel some kind of way, as if, again, they're in that space of, I'm striving for perfection and I still can't get it right. When we think about macro managing, let me back it up. When we think about macro managing, we think about, okay, giving a person a space to do what they need to do. I give them the space and I give them the instructions. But for a person, that may be one person, it may be great, but for another person, that may equal abandonment. It may remind them of a time where somebody was not available to them, that left them hanging when they needed help. And not all people are actually in a space where they feel comfortable asking for help. Small rooms. Sometimes when people don't know, they don't know. When it comes down to small rooms, people will say, hey, let's all gather in this small room. It's only 3 of us or 5 of us. We can get in here. People fail to realize how that can cause trauma for individuals who may have had to share a room with a few people, for people who may not feel comfortable with somebody being so close to you, and people disregard your personal space and come very close to you. And so what I've always learned is that when you are around a person, whether you're at work or school, a student, give that person personal space. Because if a person feels like their personal space is disregarded, they'll feel some kind of way. They may feel threatened because they may have had a traumatic situation where somebody came into their personal space and did them harm, came into their personal space and threatened them. And so those are some things that is very important to remember. Personal space is super, super important. Even if you're like, oh, I'm okay. Like, oh, if a person slides over, don't slide over with them. Allow them to have that personal space, because that's them quietly saying that I'm uncomfortable. Last minute projects, whether you're on the job or you're given an assignment for a classroom. Think about how much anxiety it is to get something done at the very last minute. I can use myself as an example, is that when I get last minute projects and it's a lot, it can be very, very overwhelming for me, because I'm just like, if I don't get this done, what does that mean for me? It causes me extreme anxiety and it makes me very, very uncomfortable. Talking down to those who are not performing well. When you are working with students or whatever area that you're in, there's a way to do every single thing when something is not going right. It's so important to be mindful of your tone. It's important to be mindful of how you're talking to someone when you're delivering bad news. The reality is that just because you're upset about it doesn't mean that you have to make a person feel bad about what they've done. Help them to understand what they've done wrong and redirect them. That's so, so important. And I say that because people will often say so and so did something wrong, but there's no redirection. There is no, this is what you can do better. People are quick to just say you did it wrong and that's it. But then when it's time to give accolades, people go into more details of saying, oh, well, you did this and you did that. But when you're done something wrong, it's like, oh, you just did it wrong. You messed up. Do the same thing, provide the same energy on both ends. As if a person does well, let them know what they've done well. But if they also didn't do so well, let them know what they didn't do and give them room to improve. When people are dealing with us in the classrooms or any settings that we may be in, they are looking for direction from us. And again, they're looking for us to kind of empower them and give them a little boost about things. Speaking loudly. So this can be a trigger for a lot of people. I know for me, I don't like anybody cussing at me or yelling or talking loud to me. For me, as a child, I know that when my mom raised her voice, I was in trouble. And so for me, it's not about me feeling that same way, but it's just about a respect issue when you're dealing with people. When you start raising your voice, what is the reason for it? I haven't informed you that I have a hearing problem. And a lot of times when people are upset about something, they use that space to give themselves power. And so for me, when I hear somebody talking loud, I talk lower. I talk a little lower to kind of give them a small indication that you're talking a little loud. Why don't you bring it down a little bit? Public speaking. When you're at work or when you're in school, a lot of people feel like, hey, you're going to go ahead and do this presentation. You're going to get up there and you got to get your A plus, or you got to do this presentation so that we can get this funding or whatever the case may be. But for a lot of people, that's a trigger. You're being put in a position that may be uncomfortable for you to speak to people about a subject that you may be very knowledgeable about. But the reality is that it's uncomfortable. It can be embarrassing because something in your life has happened where you've been embarrassed and people didn't help you, they made fun of you. And so it's so important to understand that these things that I just mentioned can be triggers for people. They're considered everyday regular things like, oh, okay, well, it's no big deal. It's a last minute project. Oh, we got to work together to get this project done. I need to get a little close to you. But understand that sometimes people may give you a response that you're not looking for, but you got to kind of dig out and say, well, what actually is happening here? And so when we talk about the trauma is that person's truth. So I've listed those things. You may say, well, why would a person be upset about that? Because it's their truth. Their truth equals their trauma. What happens in your life is your story and your trauma. Don't feel the need to rewrite someone else's story because that's their situation. We may all get together and be in a room and have the same thing that happens to us, but it does not equal the same trauma. And you have to remember that when you're working with somebody, rather, again, if it's in the workplace as a colleague or a student and you're working with them, please understand that if you may see, I'll use something very common. If you see a police car, you may say, oh, it's a police car, no big deal. Whereas somebody else may say, that's a police car. I wonder what's going on. Who's hurt? Who got arrested? And they think a little differently because they may say, well, the last time I seen a police car, somebody ended up dead. So when we see these things happen, it's just so important not to downgrade that person's story or their situation because we don't understand. It's important to have the conversation so that we can get a better understanding and kind of get ourselves in a space of I'm shifting my perspective to understand you better and for you to understand me better. So shifting your perspective on your approach is very, very important. So when something happens, like some of the things that I've mentioned before, or you see something that is a little different from what you're used to, the first thing that a lot of us will feel so comfortable saying, "What's wrong with you? What's going on?" And it's more of how you approach a person. Don't say what's wrong. Ask them what happened. Ask them the details of why are you not comfortable doing public speaking? Why is it difficult for you to believe that you can achieve something? Allow a person that opportunity to share that information with you, because a lot of times when someone has been through something, they're never given the opportunity to share what they have to say. So it's important for us to remember when we're dealing with people, is to ask, did something happen to make you feel this way? Versus what's wrong? Because what's wrong kind of gives a trigger to some people too, like, never mind, I don't want to talk to you. So just think about that. And even when a person is in a space where they may not feel like they're at their best, encourage them and celebrate them where they are. It is so important for us to be in a space to encourage people and to say that you're doing well, but I'll help you to do better. What are your goals? What are some things that you want to accomplish? I think that is very important in any relationship, as far as colleagues and coworkers, students and teachers, even in your personal life for friends and family. You need to say, okay, you're not this is not something that you would like to do. This is not where you need to be, but you're doing great at this. You've been persevering through these circumstances. This is amazing. What can I do to help you through the process? Because a lot of times nobody wants to give that extra helping hand, but everybody's comfortable saying that something is wrong. Everybody's comfortable saying that you can't do it, but help a person to understand and see what the things that they desire to change. And just because you see something that's different in their lives that you may not like, doesn't mean that person is okay with that. I mean, doesn't mean that that person sees that there's an issue, but you have to redirect and celebrate that person where they are. You may not have your high school diploma today. You may not have a job, but you know what? You're really good at when you are getting the schedule ready for the kids. You make sure you put different things in order. You have a lot of skills that you can add and remind them of that. I know that I ran into a lot of single parents that had an issue with just simply acknowledging that they had skills because they didn't have a traditional job. And I always say to a person who doesn't have a job, well, if you have kids, you have work experience, you have skills that you need to apply into different areas. You just have to acknowledge them. So always remember to celebrate those where they are. And when we talk about shifting your perspective on your approach, again, it's so important to do empowering over pitying. And I say this because it's so easy for somebody to feel sorry for you and say, "Oh, I can't believe that happened. That is so sad." Like, "Oh, I can't believe it." You can say that 50 times over again, over and over again, over and over again. Um, but the reality is that person is not looking for you to pity them. They need empowerment. And when we work with different people in different areas, they're looking for us to redirect them and to help them. And no matter what that may be. And so it's okay to feel bad and say, "I'm sorry that this thing happened to you," once you hear the story or whatever they've been through. But you have to also get yourself into a position where you say, "Okay, you know what? Like I just mentioned before, let's go ahead and figure out what we can do to help you through this situation." You know you're a strong individual. You know that, start pointing out those things that they have in them that they've already mentioned to you, things that you've been noticing, and not to gas them up and give them false hope, but really pull on those things that you've noticed about them. A lot of times a person is not looking for you to tell them, "Oh, this is so bad." They know it's bad because they're living it. But you have to be in a space to say, "You know what? I want to empower this person because when I was in a bad situation, someone spoke life into me. Somebody empowered me so that I wasn't in this bad situation and in this bad mindset." Well, I won't say bad, negative mindset. When you're doing this, be mindful of your body language. A lot of times people don't understand how traumatic things can be as far as just simple body language. I talked about personal space because that's a huge thing for me. When we talk about personal space, remember giving person a personal space is important, like arm's length. I know you can't see me, Austin, but giving a person's arm's length. I was always taught that when I was a kid. You know, you should always be able to give a person personal proximity. You should be able to stretch your hand and turn around and have that personal space. And then when you're approaching somebody, think about the posture that you're coming towards them with. Are you presenting them with business, or are you presenting them with like sass or attitude? And then think about when a person is tapping their nails and tapping their feet. That may be a sign that can be a triggering thing, or that may be a sign that somebody is going through something. Something as simple as tapping your nails and tapping your feet can be something where it can make or break a person's situation, because a person usually does it when they're anxious. They're anxious because they are taking a test. If they're taking a test, it reminds them of when they took that test when they were in the first grade and they didn't do so well. Or they're anxious because I'm excited about something. But it's important to pay attention to the body language and what people are doing. When it comes down to touching people, I am a firm believer is that healthy touches are so important to remember. When I say healthy touches, I mean asking a person permission. If a person is in distress or feeling like they're going through a situation and you want to help, you really have to be mindful about what you're doing. It was so easy to just tap a person on their shoulder and say, oh, it'll be okay. I had to learn the importance of asking a person, can I touch your back? Can I give you a hug? Is it okay if I do this? Because a lot of people have been through different situations that cause them to not want to be touched or not have somebody so close to them. Or the fact of somebody tapping their nails may give them the memory of them getting in trouble. So think about those kind of things. Again, healthy touches is something that we all need to be cautious of when dealing with anybody for that matter, because a healthy touch can definitely set a person back. But just remember that when you want to just touch somebody, shake a hand or whatever it is, just always ask, is it okay if I shake your hand? If it's okay if I give you a hug? Not just because of the pandemic, but just to make sure that you're not offending anybody. Eye rolling. So eye rolling can be can be taken both ways. So when we think about eye rolling, a person may say, "Oh, cut it out" in a joking manner, but that may be if you're not in a close relationship with the person, rolling your eyes can be very disrespectful, and it can also cause a person to be set off. You know, that may make a person feel disregarded. They make it feel like I'm not important. You rolled your eyes at me, and I'm sharing something with you. You got to think about that, because that's so important, is to never make a person that you're working with or dealing with feel not important. And this last one is heavy breathing. I don't mean heavy breathing because you have a medical condition. I mean the sign, the for me, that's the thing that's like, you got to figure out what's going on, or better yet, because I know for me, I don't like it when my children do it. Because it's like a disregard. You feel like this is bothersome to you. So that sign and things like that can be a trigger for you and that other person. So when we talk about the body language and dealing with trauma, think about these different things and just see what interactions are you having and what kind of signs are you giving off to a person. They may be traumatic for you or that person, but the goal is again to just be conscious of what we're doing. Now, when we're talking about our body language, we also want to be conscious of the different things that are coming out of our mouths. So when we think about the different things that can be triggering, it's a lot, but I only put a few on here. And this is just different things that a person may say that they feel like, oh, you know, it's okay for me to say this to you. So when a person is going through a situation or facing anything, and let's say it's a bad grade, let's say they got bad news, these are a few things that may not be the healthiest thing to say to someone. It can't be that bad. You'll be fine. It'll work out. But how do you know? How do you know if a person is going to actually be fine and things will work out for them? So giving them false hope. A trigger phrase that personally for me is, you need to do this or you need to do that. And it's just like, that is something that you have to be mindful of, because a person may already be in a space where they're not able to receive that, but you're now telling them what they need to do. How are you going to be in a space to help them versus just telling them they need to do? Again, that goes back to giving someone instructions and guiding them and showing them what's needed to do to take those necessary steps to get to that next thing. When a person says it doesn't take all that, you don't know what it takes for a person to wake up every single day. You don't know what it means for a person to be in a space where they say, okay, I'm going to get up and get dressed and go to school or go to work or whatever it is. And I'm saying this, and I'm saying work and school because this is so important to talk about on the job as well. And a person may say, you know what, I have to go up and turn on my music, or I have to smoke a cigarette. You're like, oh, it doesn't take all that to get ready. You don't know what it takes that person to do. So give them that common respect and kind of refrain from saying it doesn't take all that. You're being dramatic. Well, I think you need to mind your business, maybe a response. But sometimes when we say you're being dramatic, a person may not be being dramatic. They may be in a space where, no, I'm being honest and serious and you're not taking me serious. And that's causing me to feel triggered. You should have just did something differently. Why did you respond that way? Well, most people, when they're responding and doing something, honestly, it makes them feel like when they do something, they're responding in the best way they knew how. And if they made a mistake, most of the time they know that they made the mistake. They don't need somebody saying that I did this, you did this, and this is the end result. And sometimes when doing things differently doesn't even equal change in the event, a person may say, okay, and I'm just going to throw it out there. You should have wore something differently. That wouldn't have happened to you. Are you serious? So because I wore this outfit, then I wouldn't have gotten attacked. That's not okay. And so I just want you to kind of think about these phrases and different things of, like, sometimes we casually say this because we're among friends or whatever, and we casually have these conversations with our clients, our people, the people that we're serving, and our coworkers. But some of these things can be very, very triggering.
One comment in the chat
from Ashley.
From Ashley. She says, these phrases to me always seem to diminish or devalue a person's emotions and how they have been impacted by an event.
I definitely agree with that. And the thing is that people do it so casually that they don't even realize it. You do it and you say, oh, no big deal, it's fine. And it's just like, wait a minute, like, you don't realize how little you're making this person feel about that. And it's, again, this is why we're having a conversation, because this conversation is not something that's being had on a regular basis. Nobody wants to talk about the things that make you uncomfortable. But the reality is that when we start having conversations, it makes you aware of things that you do, and also makes others aware of the things that they do, and work together to say, okay, how are we going to work towards our common goal? What are we going to do to make changes so that when we're working with our students, we're working with our coworkers, we're not making anybody feel uncomfortable. Being mindful of our conversation. So that goes back to those triggering things that we're saying in our body language and everything that we're doing. It's so important to be an active listener when you're dealing with anybody. I'm saying anybody because this can apply anywhere. Active listening is just kind of letting a person speak and tell their stories, tell what's going on, and just listen. Sometimes we're so in the need to say something all the time. Don't feel the need to interrupt. Even if you feel like there's something that you really want to share, write it down. Give them an opportunity. When you give that person that space to speak, especially in the classroom settings, if you give that person an opportunity to speak, if there's like a class share and that person is going over, put a time limit. Say we're going to give 5 minutes for everybody to share, whatever the case may be. But don't feel like you need to interject every single time. Don't make it about you. It's okay if you want to give feedback, but keep it to a minimum and keep it at a time that's appropriate. Because sometimes once that door is open where people feel comfortable enough to share something with you, you opening your mouth can definitely make somebody shut down. I taught health and employability. I got into different things like this about how a person may not have confidence because of the different things that they've gone through. And they start saying, oh, this is a therapy class. It's not a therapy class, but I'm allowing you to let some of that out so I can build you up for the next level, which is employment. No blaming. I cannot stress this enough. Don't blame a person for something that they've been through. No matter how it looks, it's not something for you to do. It is not your place. As a teacher, instructor, or a person working where you work, it's so important that, like I mentioned before, is encourage people where they are. Don't make a person feel bad for something that they've been through, because the reality is that when we go through things, we didn't choose to go through them. They happen to us. And then sympathy versus empathy. So many people want to respond in a way to say, oh yeah, I understand. Like, I can't believe that happened. The reality is that you don't understand. You can sympathize and say, okay, wow, that's a terrible thing and all that good stuff. But if you haven't been through that situation, you can't understand how it really feels for a person to have gone through sexual abuse, who has gone through not having a meal, and now they're so caught, they overspend as an adult buying groceries because they don't ever want to be in a position where their kids ever go without. Be in a space where you're genuine when you're speaking with people. And I say that because people will respect you more, but people, and I've witnessed it, people are like, yeah, wow, yeah, I know. And it's like, you don't know what it feels like to be in that person, but you just want to keep the conversation going along. So you agree with them and say that you understand and know how they feel when you actually don't. So be very, very mindful of the conversations that you're having, to just make sure that you are still creating that safe space for a person to interact in. So this is something that I really thought long and hard about, because I remember having the corrections team on last time. And when you're dealing with people who are dealing with trauma, it's so important to make the decision to plan. It's so important. And the reason why I say that is because in the event that something happens for you, for a coworker, in the classroom setting, in a seminar, what is the plan in case someone is triggered, in case someone has an explosion? What do you do? Some important things to think about is, who is the support team? So in the event that you're teaching and someone is having an outburst and having a moment, who can you call that's going to pick up and answer immediately, so they can remove that person from that situation, or to allow you to step out with the person and take over the classroom? Because I remember someone saying that, oh, it caused a disruption for 10 or 15 minutes and I don't always have support. Make sure you know who your support team is in any situation. And I say this is even when you're at home, if there's a case of emergency, there's somebody to call. If you're at work, in case somebody's not available, there's a backup person. So make sure there's always a backup person to help you deal with things, because at any point in time, somebody can have a triggered moment. Who is able to support you when you're not 100%? Now, this is something that a lot of people don't discuss, is that sometimes we may be in a situation, maybe even sitting here today, and you are learning these different things and hearing these different things, and you are feeling triggered. Who is there for you when you are not feeling 100% and you need to step away? You need to make sure that you can identify who that person is, and identify that safe place with that person to say, okay, we were talking about the loss of a parent today, and I'm not feeling my best, and I just need to step outside for a minute for work. I step out of the classroom for a few minutes because I'm not okay. I think that's so important to remember while you're working, is because if you're not going to do well, let me rephrase that. If you're not doing well mentally, physically, and emotionally, you are no good to the classroom or that office that day. So it's so important that who is your support when you need to pull yourself out for a moment. And I kind of mentioned this twice, is just who's available to step in so that you're able to step away. So in case something happens, again, the support team, this is all questions to ask to be a part of that support team. And most of all, how can I keep myself safe? And I say that because we may be dealing with a student that may have a moment, and they may feel like, because you're talking about this, or you made a mistake because you didn't know their story, you said something that triggered them, and now they're upset with you, and now they're yelling in your face, getting in your personal proximity, and now you feel like you're being physically you're being threatened, your space is being threatened. So you're like, how do I keep myself safe? You got to think about that. What is the plan in case that happens? What is the plan in the event that a student is talking about something and you feel stressed out and you feel overwhelmed? How do you keep yourself safe so that you're not in a space where you're no longer able to function in a positive manner? It's so important to think about this and discuss this, and even discuss this among your friends, because it's important that we have the support that we need when we're going through those hard times. Because a hard time does not mean that it's going to go away in a few minutes. It may be months and months of this, but we got to figure out who has our back. And like I always mention when I'm talking about trauma-informed care, when I'm talking about dealing with work or anything of this level, you always got to take care of yourself. Do a wellness check with you, because exhaustion is a real thing. And at the end of the day, I know we are all passionate about what we do. If you're here today, you're passionate about what you do, which I am too. But you have to remember that exhaustion is real. When you've reached that place where you are no longer able to go anymore, your engine, you're smoking, you just can't go anymore, you have to figure out how you're going to handle that. And you have to identify whether you're experiencing secondary trauma and compassion fatigue, because you want to give. But sometimes we don't have people that gives to us. We don't have somebody that's there to, what they say, let it out, pour it out to me. I'll be your support system. And you may feel like, oh, I really want to help this person, but I just don't have it in me. My husband and I have this thing called I've reached my capacity. And I like to share this every time I talk about trauma-informed care, is because when something happens, it's our safe way of saying, I'm full for today. I'm just not well. I'm not good. Like I've reached my capacity. I can't handle anymore. And that means that the other person has to step in and say, hey, okay, let me know what I need to do. How can I help you? How can I be supportive to you? When you are teaching and working and doing everything that you need to do for yourself to survive, to live, and wearing every single hat that you have, how are you taking care of yourself? A lot of times people say, oh, I go home, I have a cup of coffee, and I go to sleep and do it again. Does that equal taking care of yourself? Or that just means I'm just functioning day to day and living day to day to get to the weekend and repeat the process? And most of all, how are you dealing with your trauma? It's not an easy thing to talk about. It's not something that a lot of people will talk about, but it's just like, hey, how do I deal with my trauma? How do I deal with the things that have been going on in the world? How do I deal with the loss of a job, a family member? It's a lot. So you have to really figure out and find a safe place and a safe person to talk about that with. It's so important for us to make sure that we are also dealing with our trauma so that we can help others to deal with theirs. And that's the first part. And how do you recharge yourself when you have reached that ultimate level of fatigue? Talking about trauma can be very exhausting. Dealing with your own trauma is exhausting. But in the same note, it's a process. Being here today is part of the process of just having the conversation about different things that we can do to do better. Changing our perspective on how we interact with people, how we speak to people, how we move around people. And I just say, you gotta really recharge yourself and think about, what can I do to help me so that I can be ready for the next round? So I'm gonna ask all of you that are on today, like I did in last session, what are some things that you do to recharge yourself after a long day, after giving it your all to your job, to your kids, your husband, your wife, whatever you have out there? How do you recharge yourself to make sure that you're going to stay out of a level of fatigue? So, a nap, yoga, tea, going outdoors. That's very zen. And baking, taking a walk, sewing. And for me, spending time with my grandchildren. For me, one thing that I absolutely love to do is to turn on some good music and completely zone out. Put that cell phone on D&D, go into my office in my home and just completely listen to my jams and get to that place where I'm like, okay, I feel better. Because even if you had a bad day, it does not constitute a bad week. And that does not mean that your life is bad. It's just that you had a bad moment and you got to work through it. So I'm loving some of these things I'm seeing in the chat box. Listening to soothing music, take a few deep breaths and stand in the sunlight. Sun is always super helpful. Hot tub and a massage. Massages are truly, truly, truly something that everybody needs to get engaged in. It helps tremendously. Count my blessings. I agree with that one. Wake up every day and say thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. So this is actually my last slide. So do we have any questions? This is a Q&A section. So this is an opportunity for you to unmute yourself and ask any questions if you have any.
Please do. We have about 5 minutes left, so we'd love to hear from you. And again, unmute yourself and just ask away.
And also, too, if you are shy, because I just mentioned that if you are shy and not comfortable, feel free to go ahead and put some things in the chat box. I'll definitely have it up and I'm able to see it. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for being here today.
Hi, this is Bex. I have a question.
Go for it.
So I really appreciated the ways that you elaborated on your examples to include adults. I work at a nonprofit that does adult education. Is there anything that is kind of unique to supporting adults
Oh, it's a lot. Like I just
that I should
transitioned
keep
from.
in mind? Yeah. Oh no,
I
go
would
ahead.
definitely say that that's a really good question, and I've learned so much over the years, and just honestly giving them an opportunity to share with you what's going on in their life. I always say, share with me what's going on. Let me know if you're facing any barriers, because a barrier to us may be like, oh, my internet, but no, a barrier to them may be like, hey, my electricity is off. Hey, this is going on. Try to allow them a space of being transparent with you, and stay in a non-judgmental space, because it's so important as an adult for you to have somebody who just understands and is willing to listen. With adults, especially if they're like 30s or 40s adults and they're doing adult education, they are really pressing and trying to get things done. And it's so important to keep them encouraged through the process, because they may have one false move and they be like, I'm just going to give up. I don't want to do this. You got to remind them, say, hey, what'd you come here for? I wanted to get my high school diploma, but what? That's so important. Keeping them encouraged is one of the things that I've learned, that keeping students encouraged, especially around that time frame, is to make sure that they understand that somebody's rooting for them and in their corner. Because a lot of times when they come back to school at that age, somebody is saying, why are you going back to school right now? What's the point?
And Karen has a question. What can we do to make physical environments better for people? Less triggering environments, she means.
To be honest, it's a various amount of things. Everything is not going to work for everybody, because something that may be triggering for me may not be triggering for you. But I'm a firm believer in making fun spaces, having things that people, stress balls and things like that. One of the things that we love to do when we were in person is give people like little stress balls during health and employability, so they can, if you had a rough morning, squeeze that stress ball and just take it out on that and then refresh. One thing that I also say too is I start the day off saying, when a person enters a classroom, I don't know if it's necessarily a class, but I say, we're going to wipe off the day from whatever you had this morning, whatever went on in your life, we're going to wipe off the day. And they literally will wipe off their feet. Even if there's nothing on there, wipe it off during the day. I always say a fun environment causes a person to feel less triggered. But in the same note, it cannot, depending on what area you're working in, it just depends on the population. For me, I've had good experiences with having bright things around, things that get people's attention, soothing colors, but then also like fidget spinners and stuff like that. Like a person may be having a rough moment, but in the same note, like it may be a distraction in class, but that may keep that person from flipping out about something. So it just depends, honestly. But those are just a few things, because honestly, a trigger can be anything. It can be white walls, it can be a red wall. So it just depends. I don't have a like one that's going to be like, that's the thing to do. It just varies. But I say, talk to, if you're thinking about as far as like a classroom setting, talk about some things, ask the students. That's what I've done in the past. Ask the students, what would make this feel more comfy? What would make it feel more inviting? Thank you so much, Michelle. I feel like I've met you before. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you.
Well, Janita, this has been absolutely amazing. We so appreciate you being here and sharing all of this. And we want to thank you again and thank all of you who have been attending this session, Trauma Informed Teaching, sponsored by Wisconsin Literacy. The final session of our winter virtual conference is tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. Please join us for Digital Resilience, a framework for reducing tutor and student tech anxiety, which fits in perfectly with what we learned today. If you'd like to register for that session, but you haven't yet, please use the link that you'll find in the chat today. And if you enjoyed this session, join us for the Big Share on Tuesday, March 7th, a fun day of virtual events and online giving that allows Wisconsin Literacy to offer this type of programming. So please visit that link in the chat as well. So again, thank you all for being here with us today. It has been a wonderful, wonderful program. Janita, thank you so very much.
Thank you, Marsha, for the opportunity. And I just thank you all for being here. Again, keep doing what you're doing. And remember, it is a process, but we're still moving and grooving in it.
Thanks. Bye, everyone. See you next time.